Hello everyone, how are we all doing today? We are back with another fan fiction, and today we have Swallow and the Dragon, Chapter 2. What if Harry Potter met Ciri? Basically a Harry Potter Witcher crossover. And before I begin, I want to say a big thank you to everyone in the comments who was very kind about all, me cold and falling off the bike. It was actually a very nice surprise. That meant a lot to me, guys, so thanks very much. But before I get too corny about it, let's carry on with Chapter 2. So yeah, let's go. Harry's POV. Harry's life from the time he was born up until about 6.5 months ago was the equivalent of a shitty roller coaster that went from a little hill of happiness to a steep drop down a ravine of horribleness. It had gone better though when he cut off connection to the British wizarding world. But it wasn't about until 6.5 months ago that he met a girl a year older than him named Ciri. It was short for Cirilla, as he found out later, but she would punch him in his arm painfully whenever he called her that. Ciri was... He didn't even have the words to properly describe her. Every time he saw her, it was like coming out of a stuffy abandoned mine to the top of a mountain. She was more than just a breath of fresh air, but it was like taking a big swing of a rejuvenation potion. She was so similar to him in so many ways, yet completely different to others. It only made sense that they had become fast friends. He had taken to do everything with her. And she seemed to return the favour by hanging around him any time she could. After being cooped up in the house for 2 months, he had taken her to go see some of the Muggle world. She had absolutely loved it. She loved seeing the skyscrapers and all the cars that drove around. She had asked him if he had a car, which he replied that he didn't. She seemed sad about that, so that night he had gone to Gringotts inconspicuously and had them convert some galleons to 300,000 euros. He had then taken that money and went to a car dealership where he bought a 1988 Ferrari Testarossa for 80,000 euros. He had to use some charms to get past the dealer's questions, like how a young kid such as himself was going to pay for such a car, and where his driver's license was. Nonetheless, he had bought the car with some liberal use of memory charms and spent an extra 10,000 euros to get it delivered to his house that morning. Getting the Muggles through the wards was a hassle, and he felt pretty bad for all the charms he applied so they would forget he had lived there. So he made sure to give them a nice tip for their troubles. Ciri had woken up and had almost screamed in excitement when she saw the car in front of the makeshift driveway Harry had to make towards their house, since it was 3/4 of a mile from the nearest road. It was an entire process learning how to drive the thing, since neither of them had ever drove before, and this wasn't exactly the best first car to have, but they eventually had gotten the hang of it. "It's even better than on a racing horse," Ciri had said with excitement as the speedometer said they just passed 257 kilometers an hour. Harry, on the other hand, was holding on for dear life with his eyes firmly closed, and she had laughed at him for a whole week after that. The next adventure they had took them to France, where they explored the more magical side of things. France's government was much less racist than the British one, and the politicians who were racist made sure to keep to themselves. This led Ciri to seeing a multitude of different humans and other creatures. She seemed to love the magical versions of food, and now had a sweet tooth that could only be satisfied with treacle tart, which, according to her, was much better tastier than the Muggle counterpart. Harry just rolled his eyes at that. It was in the middle of that argument when Fleur had spotted him and came over.
"Harry, it is so good to see you again,"
Fleur said as she came up and hugged him, which was a big surprise to him. Ciri had just watched calmly the whole time, though Harry could tell she wasn't comfortable. "Hello, Fleur. It's good to see you too. How have you been? How's your sister doing?" Harry asked politely. It seemed her English had improved, and she could pronounce most words with her heavy accent. The French girl beamed at him.
"I am well, and so is my sister, though you should be careful. She recently hit puberty and you are target to think her close into. You know her crush on you only got worse after the tournament,"
Fleur said back to him. Harry shifted uncomfortably at the thought. He had no doubt that Gabrielle would be as beautiful as her sister, but he doubted he would ever see her as anything more than a little girl he had known her as. Maybe I should stay away from France for the time being then, Harry mused. Anyway, Fleur, this is Ciri. Ciri, this is Fleur. Ciri is a friend of mine who I've been showing around. I wanted her to see some of the more magical land points that aren't in Britain for, well, you know why. Harry said, giving Fleur a slight look to let her know that he had not told Ciri about the British situation. Fleur seemed to understand.
"Hello Ciri, it is so nice to meet another friend of Harry's,"
Fleur said as she shook Ciri's hand pointedly, but with some eagerness to it. "It's nice to meet you as well. I had the impression that Harry didn't have many other friends. Must be hiding in Britain with the rest of his secrets," Ciri said snarkily as she shot a glare at Harry, letting him know that she knew he was hiding stuff from her.
"Oh my, quite the new friend you have here, Harry. I like her already. Maybe she can actually rein you in." It would be quite a feat, but she looked up to the task.
Fleur said as she looked at Ciri with approval in her gaze. Both Harry and Ciri's face lit up red at the comment. Yeah, well, we're more of just good friends, really. Right, Ciri? He said, looking at the ashen-haired girl who looked back up to him. Yes, very much so, very much. Good friends is all, she responded earnestly. Fleur covered her mouth, as she was very clearly laughing at them.
You two are so alike, it's uncanny. Why don't you just meet for lunch? It's been a while and we need to catch up.
Fleur said as she pushed the two of them to the nearest cafe, despite their protest. The lunch was actually very nice and peaceful, but he occasionally saw some reporter out of the corner of his eye snapping pictures of them. But he ignored it. Fleur was very good at keeping Ciri involved in the conversation, and she seemed to enjoy telling the girl about some of Harry's fourth-year exploits, which Ciri seemed to think was terribly impressive for a 14-year-old. I can't believe you had to go up against a dragon. At 14? That's ridiculous, Ciri said. Fleur nodded in agreement as Harry tried to downplay it. I didn't do much, I just flew away from it, to be honest, Harry grumbled.
Essaye if it's natural to outfly a dragon.
Fleur commented with amusement. Ciri seemed to be quite amused as well. Honestly, Harry, it's okay to feel some pride in your accomplishments. You don't have to be so modest about everything, Ciri exclaimed. Harry just rolled his eyes.
Here you got into quite a few adventures before your fourth year. Well. Something about a basilisk when you were 12, I believe.
Fleur said insolently. Harry glared as the older girl added fuel to the fire that was Ciri. A basilisk? What's with you and going against draconoids, you suicidal imbecile? Ciri said as she punched his arm for his stupidity. Ow! Hey, I didn't have a choice. The damn thing took my friend. Plus, you're thinking of the basilisks of legend that were flying reptiles with roosters' heads. The basilisk here is a large snake that can grow up to 80 feet in length and 7 to 10 feet in height, Harry said, and Ciri's eyes bulged at him. And you attacked it? She almost yelled. Harry had long since put up silencing wards around their table so they wouldn't be heard by anyone, but they were getting weird looks. Well, it took my friend.
If I remember my history correctly, basilisks are infamous for having the strongest poison in the magical world, next to the nundu, a gas that can kill you if you make eye contact with it.
Fleur added innocently once more. Harry's glare could melt iron with how hot it was as he looked at Fleur. Fleur! He yelled. Fleur just looked at him with innocence. Harry palmed his face. Ciri was looking gobsmacked at him before horror crossed her face. That big scar on your arm. You said you got it from a snake bite, Ciri said in horror. Fleur's face was also devolved into horror. Harry gulped at that. Yes, that would have been from the basilisk, but before you say anything, a phoenix healed me with its tears, so I'm good now, Harry said to the horror-filled women. That was 5 minutes ago. They had yet to stop hitting and kicking him over and over while calling him an idiot. Ladies, come on, I get the point. Won't do it again, I promise. Please stop, I can feel myself bleeding. They probably would have continued if a phoenix had not flamed directly onto their table. All sounds of violence and complaints of said violence had stopped. Fawkes was looking directly at Harry, and Harry was doing everything not to glare at the bird. He saw the letter the phoenix was carrying in its mouth. Take it back, I don't want it, Harry told the bird calmly as possible. Fawkes just kept looking at him. Even if you leave it with me, I won't read it. I couldn't care any less what that old man has to say. I'm not going back, Harry told Fawkes. Fawkes dropped the letter on the table in front of him, gave him one last meaningful look, and then disappeared in a ball of flame. Harry glared at the note in silence. He then took out the note, then lit it on fire with a low-powered incendio. You're really not going to read it? What if it says something important? Ciri asked. It doesn't. It's just the usual guilt trip for trying to get me to come back, he said darkly. Fleur looked at him with an uncharacteristic seriousness in her eyes.
Harry, I am and always will be your friend, but you cannot run from this forever,
Fleur said. I'm not running. I'm just not participating in it. I don't see why I should help the sheep when they are so willingly throwing me out to the wolves when I tried to warn them. Now that I'm suddenly proven right, they jump back on my bandwagon. Fuck them. I will not put my life on the line for people who aren't worth it, Harry angrily replied. Whether you want to stay out of it or not, he won't stop until you're dead. You know that, Harry. You know that one day you will have to face him. You doing everything in your power to avoid that is running away whether you like it or not, Fleur said seriously, and Harry couldn't help but notice that she said that sentence in almost perfect English, which only showed how serious she was. Then I suppose we can agree to disagree on that, Harry said. They had parted not much longer after those words were said. Fleur had apologised for her words and expressed how she hoped it wouldn't affect their friendship. Harry had assured her it wouldn't and gave her a hug goodbye to reinforce that. Fleur had smiled and returned just as he and Ciri did through the flu. Ciri had asked about that conversation almost every day for the next month. She was stubborn about finding out. Harry found it both annoying and endearing at the same time. Eventually, he finally sat her down and told her his life story. She had understood and in return had told him about her own life as well. How she too was the subject of a prophecy, which was why the Wild Hunt was chasing her in the first place. They wanted her blood to stop their world from being destroyed. They wanted to kill her to do it, which Harry disapproved heavily of. Still, it was another thing that brought Harry and Ciri closer together. Ciri had one day decided to start using her sword again lest she fall out of practice. "Have you ever used a sword before?" she asked as she walked into the training room Harry had made for her. "Yeah, I killed the basilisk with a sword. That was the first and last time I used one," Harry told her. She got a look like she wanted to hit him again but decided against it. "I could teach you if you're interested," she said. Harry looked at her. "Are you trying to convince me to let you hit me with a metal pointy stick?" Harry asked. She smiled and nodded. He sighed. "I'll go get a sword," Harry said as he went to Gringotts and pulled one from the Potter vault. It was a well-made sword, but nothing special, which suited his needs perfectly. Ciri told him he was a natural with a blade, yet that didn't seem to ever stop him from walking out of the training room covered in bruises. Yes, it had been a wonderful 6.5 months, the best of Harry's life if he was being completely honest with himself. Yet he had a terrible feeling that was about to come to an end. He had noticed Ciri staring off into space and looking a lot more sad. He suspected that she missed her home. Harry tried to make sure that she wanted for nothing, but he knew more than most that nothing could ever really replace somewhere that you willingly called home. If anyone deserved to go home, it was Ciri. It was these thoughts he was having as he walked into the living room to see her staring off into the lit fireplace in deep thought. Harry moved to sit next to her. She briefly recognised his presence before going back to her thoughts. They sat like that for a good 20 minutes. "You're leaving soon," Harry said. He had meant to say it as a question, but they both knew it was a statement of fact. She looked him in the eyes, then looked down sadly and nodded. "How long?" he asked her. "A week, maybe 2, she said to him. Harry nodded. "Well, I suppose we should start making preparations then," Harry mumbled, as he moved to get up and leave so she would not see how distraught he truly was. As soon as he tried to move, though, Ciri jumped at him, wrapped her arms around him tightly and buried her face in the crook of his neck. He could feel the tears on his neck. He slowly wrapped one arm around her waist and the other around her torso and held her tightly. He laid his head gently atop hers, trying to make sure he memorised everything about her in the short time they would have left. She smelled like the wild to him. A smell he never knew he could be so intoxicating. They stayed like that for the rest of the night. 2 weeks later, Harry was helping Ciri pack the remaining clothes she would bring with her into a new trunk. He had put a very simple rune on the trunk that would shrink and expand it if you channeled magic into it, something that Ciri had in spades as he had later found out. "Do you have everything? Books, blouses, undergarments?" Harry asked as he finished packing and shrunk the trunk. She put it on the necklace around her neck for easy carrying. "I'm sure I have everything, though if you want to go digging through my undergarments to make sure, feel free," she said sarcastically. Harry blushed at the idea but still smiled in amusement. "No thanks, I like my balls intact, thank you very much," Harry responded. Ciri walked in front of him. "How do I look?" she asked as she did a twirl. She wore the same clothes she had when she first arrived, a white blouse and light brown trousers, with a familiar sword attached to her back. Harry smiled at her. "Perfect," he told her as a smile lingered, hoping he was doing a good enough job to cover his sadness. She smiled at him reassuringly before taking his hand and walking slowly through the house for the last time. It was such a nice and peaceful experience that Harry almost forgot that this would be his last ever time they did this. They reached the front door and Harry had to fight every cell in his body telling him not to open it. But he did because he knew that, as much as it hurt to let her go, it would hurt infinitely times more if he forced her to stay. The door opened and beautiful sunlight came through. Harry felt a little upset that it was such a beautiful day on what he would probably consider one of the worst of his life, for a while at least. They both stepped outside the house and simply stood there. Harry didn't know how long he just stood there holding her hand and trying to soak in her presence. All he knew was that it didn't last long enough. She released his hand and looked at him. "I suppose I should be on my way," she said quietly. Harry didn't know what he said. He said the first thing that came into his head. "I'll never forget you, you know. Never forget the time we shared together," Harry said. She smiled at his words and it seemed to make her happy. "I hope you know it's the same for me as well. You gave me a couple of months of bliss, of not having to worry about people's expectations, of not having to be hunted down. It was nice to be normal for a while. I want to give you something, she said as she reached around her neck. Harry briefly thought she was taking off the trunk necklace to give it back to him. He was about to protest until she pulled off a chain to reveal a silver, snarling wolf head on the end. Harry's heart skipped a beat. He, of course, had seen the necklace before and knew the significance. Ciri, you can't shush. Take it. Something to remember me by. Seems only fair with all you've given me. But you said that your father, when I see him again, he will understand, Ciri said. She was giving him a hard look that told him she wouldn't be moved on this. Despite himself, he couldn't help but smile at her stubbornness. God, he was going to miss her. Harry took the chain and wrapped it around his neck and attached it. He put the wolf head under his shirt and was surprised by how warm it was despite it being metal. He briefly remembered that it was constantly pressed against Ciri's own skin, which had kept it from cooling. He marvelled at the sensation before looking back at Ciri. She smiled at him. One more thing to remember me by, she said with a sly grin. Harry looked at her with confusion. What do you mean? He said as he was interrupted as she grabbed his shirt and pulled him towards her hard and smashed her lips on his. Harry didn't care who knew it. He felt in that one moment like he was going to melt into goo. He was finally conscious enough to return it with full force. It was a few moments before Ciri pulled away. She smiled at him. You better remember that or I will come back and beat you black and blue, she said as she backed up a few feet. Oh, I'll remember that as long as I live, I can guarantee it, Harry said with a smile that wouldn't take itself off his face. Her grin got bigger. I'm glad to have met you, Harry James Potter, she called to him. And are you, Cirilla Fiona Rionian? Rionian, I can't say it, I'm sorry. He called back at her with a smile. She gave a small laugh at his failure to pronounce her full name. Remember, Harry, only we can change our fate. No one else can do it for us. Don't be a slave to yours, she said before disappearing in a bright blue flash. Harry was not sure how long he stood out there looking at where she had disappeared. All he knew was that it was dark out when he finally went back into his manor. A manor near the entrance revealed dry tear streaks. He summoned Creature to bring him a moist handcloth to wipe his face. He then went to sit down at the dining table to eat a meal alone for the first time in months. He spent the entirety of it thinking of Ciri. He would need to master oculomancy, and soon. He never wanted to forget her face, let alone all the memories they made together. Not to mention those last words she said to him. Alright, Ciri, for you, I'll confront my destiny. Even if it means my death. Hogwarts the next day. General POV. It was a normal day for the Hogwarts crowd. This year was surprisingly quiet and easygoing despite the Dark Lord running rampant. Of course, that could also have to do with the fact that a certain golden boy wasn't there. No one in Britain had seen Harry Potter in months. He had showed up in France a few months ago eating lunch with two girls but had not been spotted since. Rumours were running rampant. Some said he was out hunting the Dark Lord's followers, while others said he was running and hiding from the powerful Dark Lord. Some said he was dead, but no matter what the rumours were, no matter if you liked or disliked him, no one had expected for Harry Potter to randomly walk into the Great Hall that morning for breakfast as if he hadn't been missing for almost a year. No one expected him to sit down and start eating some eggs and bacon while not paying a single ounce of attention to anyone around him. Yet that is exactly what happened that cold February morning. The hall was completely silent as all movements came to a halt. The headmaster of Hogwarts, Albus Dumbledore, stood up and looked at the boy in what many thought was amazement. Harry Potter, he called out, his voice booming. Harry paused from eating and looked up to the old man with a bored expression. What? He asked quietly as his voice was heard throughout the entirety of the Great Hall. Everyone was holding their breath. May I speak privately with you, please? Dumbledore clearly asked, wanting to take him away from the hundreds of students who were watching intently. Harry shrugged nonchalantly. After I'm done eating, he said as he went back to eating his eggs. Why, you insolent! Snape had started before Dumbledore silenced him with a glare. He then looked back to Harry. As you wish. But no later than that, please, Dumbledore said. Harry didn't grace him with a response. It was then that everyone burst into talking and starting up new rumours about Harry Potter once more. It was only a few minutes later a shriek was heard throughout the hall. Harry! Someone yelled at the entrance hall. Harry turned to look and was immediately smashed into by one of his best friends. Where have you been? Hermione yelled at him, trying to squeeze the literal life out of him. Harry did his best to shrug. I was on holiday, he said nonchalantly. Harry, summer holiday ended ages ago, she said. Harry nodded. Yeah, I noticed when it got cold and then later started snowing a few months back, Harry said. So where have you been? Hermione asked again. I was still on holiday, Harry told her. She didn't seem happy about that. You mean you willingly skipped school so that you could do nothing and relax? She said, getting angry. That sounds about right, yeah, Harry said as he looked at Ron. Ron took the eyes as cue to greet him. Hey, mate. Glad to see you in one piece and everything. Was getting worried for a moment there, Ron said as he patted Harry on the back. Harry nodded and gave his friend a smile. Yeah, good to see you guys too, he said to them both. In truth, he had missed them, but most of the time he had been hanging out with Ciri. Ron, did you not hear him? He ditched school to go on a holiday, Hermione said, still flabbergasted. Ron looked at Harry and smiled. Yeah, I heard. I gotta say, mate, I'm jealous. Of all the time to just relax and not have Snape or McGonagall breathing down your neck. Must have been nice. But why didn't you tell us? Ron asked. Hermione finally calmed down so she could hear the answer. Harry sighed. I just didn't feel like talking or having to explain myself. Let's just drop it, alright? I'm here now. That's what matters. How are classes going? Harry asked. Well, you know me. If it wasn't for Hermione, I would have failed years ago. Ron said. Hermione blushed at the praise. You would be fine if you actually tried to do your homework without being forced, Hermione said back. Ron smiled. Honestly, who has the time for that? Ron said. Harry squinted at the two but said nothing. He wiped his mouth, finished his meal and stood up. Well, I have to go talk to Dumbledore, he said, preparing to leave. Alright, but come meet up with us after once you're done so we can catch up. Ron said and Hermione agreed with the statement. Harry nodded and left the Great Hall. Harry's POV. Harry pushed open the door to the headmaster's office without even bothering to knock. It looked all neat and tidy again, not like the destroyed mess he had turned it into. Dumbledore, you wanted to talk to me? Harry said, and Dumbledore stared at him for a few minutes. Harry, I want to confess my apologies to you, he said softly. Harry squinted his eyes in suspicion at the man. Was he trying to win him back under his wing or something? I want you to know that everything I have done was to try and protect you and to make sure that you came out the other end of this conflict alive. I see now that I perhaps pushed you too hard and did not tell you things that I should have done. Although many think me infallible, Harry, I'm not. There are more days where I fully feel my age than I have ever felt before. I want you to know I truly did what I thought was best for you. I don't know if I was right or wrong to do it, but that it doesn't matter because in the end I hurt you and you placed your trust in me. I'm sorry you felt the need to take an extended leave of absence to right yourself, and I take full responsibility for the trials you have gone through, my boy. I'm so sorry, Dumbledore said. Harry could clearly see tears in his eyes. Wow, he truly meant what he was saying. It's fine, I forgive you, Harry stated simply but truthfully. He could understand where Dumbledore was coming from. Sometimes all you could do was your best. That didn't mean it was always enough. It warms my heart to hear that. Nevertheless, I am sorry, he said again. Harry shook his head. I didn't leave because of you. To me, you were a symptom, but you weren't the main problem. I left because I was angry and frustrated. I was mad because after a year of trying to tear me down in every way they could, after watching my godfather die in front of me, for them, I just couldn't stand this country. They treated me like rubbish, expecting me to just forgive their stupidity and throw myself in the way of a Dark Lord that they were too scared to go up against themselves. In a way, I think I despise them more than I do Voldemort. I also don't think they'll ever change. Harry said. Dumbledore looked saddened to hear about Harry's opinion of the wizarding world, but could not fault him for it. If I may ask, why did you come back then? I could not find even a trace of you despite my best efforts, and I know Voldemort could not either, otherwise you would be dead, Dumbledore asked. Harry didn't say anything for a second as he thought of Ciri. His beautiful Ciri. Someone I loved told me that only I had the power to change my fate, that I could run all I wanted, but that would just make me a slave to it. I'm here to fight against my fate because no one else can do it for me, Harry said. The headmaster nodded at him. This person sounds very wise, he commented, and Harry couldn't help but smile. She would like to think of herself as so, I'm sure, Harry said as he once again thought of her, his face turned serious though. But enough of the sappy conversation. Where's Voldemort? I have a score to settle. Okay guys, and that's the end there. I hope you all enjoyed chapter 2 of The Swallow and the Dragon. So yeah, like I said, it's a little bit slow starting off, as I've said this in the last chapter, but hopefully you guys can stay on with us just a little bit longer until Harry actually joins the world of The Witcher, where things really start to kick up in an amazing way. And unfortunately, this is not Avengers of Steel, and the next chapter will not be Avengers of Steel either. I've got a scheduling plan set up for how I'm going to do this, and I hope you'll all enjoy it with me. So yeah, let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Please like, subscribe, and I'll see you all in the next chapter.